Everyone fed and watered. And caffeine up again, more to the point, so when you fall asleep after lunch. All good? Yeah? Awesome. Right, so cameras are colourblind. Believe it or not. They capture colour, but they see in black and white. Everyone knows the zone system? Yeah? Not everyone does. But we're not going to talk about that too much. Cameras see in shades of grey. And it uses that tonality to gauge where it sits in the exposures. Okay? So basically, you've got three things going on in your camera when you take a picture. You've got a focusing sensor, you've got a light meter, and you have the main sensor. Okay? So the light meter sees this, and the sensor captures the light and processes it and figures out how much red, green, and blue there is in the picture. So technically, they're not colourblind, but when you're metering, they are. It's just seeing grey. The thing I touched on earlier is that your cameras are all different. So some of you, I speak to some of you between the talks and lunch and stuff like that, and you don't all shoot with the same model cameras, right? You know, you might have one kind of camera, another kind of camera, other Canon shooters, so some of you might have a 5D and a 1DX or a 5D and something else, a 7D or something like that. I don't know the Nikon ones. I'm kind of ambassador to say that. So basically, you're going to get that variance, and you need to take that out in your shot. So for the wedding photographers, amongst us, we end up shooting way more images than, you know, a landscape photographer and maybe a commercial photographer or something like that. Maybe motorsports, you take as many as we do. I don't know how often you burst, but you know, when you're going through the shot, even if you're shooting in manual, you'll end up with different kind of shots because you can't control the lighting conditions. If you're doing motorsports, it's outdoors, the sun's going in and out, overcast, it might be going through a tunnel, whatever it is. You can't control the lighting, so you have to have a consistent start point all the way through. So even if you're shooting in manual, you need to be able to control this. But you need to control the viewing experience for your clients, particularly the wedding photographers here, and particularly when you go to print. Because a standalone print on a wall, you can get away with a fair amount, but when you have a series of images side by side in an album, say, you're going to struggle if you're not managing the consistency. What you're going to find is images will jump. Some might be too magenta, some might be too green, one might be dull, one might be too bright, and so on and so on. And that becomes a distraction, and that becomes a thing that your brides and grooms and your clients are going to notice. And it doesn't just apply to wedding photographers, but you know, we are kind of at the sharp end of that scale. So we need to make sure we keep that under control, because that consistency equates to trust, always. Consistency equates to trust. Think about going to your favourite restaurant. You go there because it's consistent, and the moment it starts to become inconsistent, you don't trust it anymore, you're not going to go there anymore. You know, you have friends who behave in a consistent way. You trust that, and the moment they become inconsistent, you lose faith in them. It's the same thing with your work and clients. If they're not consistent, people won't trust you, they won't trust your work. Okay? Do that in a minute. Before we do, we need to just touch on the screen again. I know Gavin covered this and he was joking about not having to recalibrate because they've got out of the box. They are great out of the box, particularly pro screens. You know, they're very good straight out of the box, but you do need to manage it. You do need to look after it, and you do need to calibrate it because they will shift. They'll shift through their temperature throughout the day mainly, and they'll shift just mainly through uses. So one thing I want to do is just very quickly go through a wedding album to show you the consistency. I'm not going to go through each image individually, but I want to demonstrate the kind of consistency that you need to be achieving all the way through. So in colour, in tonality, in feel, particularly when you have images side by side on a spread. I mean, obviously you've got indoor, you know, interior and exterior here, it's a completely different feel, but you're still maintaining a tonal and colour quality. Different kinds of images, different cameras, you know, in this set, but there's a consistency all the way through it. Even when you go from outdoor to indoor, similar kind of feel, similar kind of consistency, even when you have different moments going on. Two different cameras, I'm shooting that one there, my assistant's taking this shot here at the same time pretty much, maybe just a few seconds later. Consistent look and feel, consistent colours, consistent tonality. You know, and again, on the left, that's mine, on the right, my wife was taking that shot. two different cameras, two different angles, they still look and feel consistent. And so on. I'll just cycle through these. You get the idea. But when you have such an onslaught of colour, you really have to manage it. If you're shooting in a muted scenario, it's a little bit easier. You can kind of get away with it. It's a little bit more forgiving. This isn't that forgiving at all. Convinced? Who isn't? Stick your hands up if you're not convinced. Had to be Gavin, didn't it? Okay. So I'm going to slightly gloss over the process that Gavin went through earlier. Let me just show you his picture. So we took a picture of the target on a chair just with the lights on. Okay? Then I did another one with Gavin. Fido Dido, isn't it? Eh? Oh, it's not good. That's so weird, isn't it? It's me talking to myself completely. Let's try that again. Okay, shot the target on its own with the lights on. And I'll explain that in a minute. Done a shot of Gavin. Under the same flash conditions that I was shooting with Jane earlier on as well. And a shot of the grey card in the same conditions. So I exported that and that as DNGs so that I could drop them into here. I'll just cancel that real quick. And you'll see down here at the bottom both those images as DNGs dropped in, and it's picked it up, it's analysed it, it's analysed both images. But you'll see at the top here I've got dual illuminant DNG. So you have an option with this to create a profile for every situation, which you can do with DNG. So if you're doing headshots, you can do that for every single shoot, just depending on the scenario. And for social photographers like myself, when you're in varied scenarios, you create the dual illuminant profile. So the idea here is it's going to analyse this DNG, which was with the ambient light, and actually it was a tube lights, which are pretty horrid anyway, and then the flash as well. So it's got to analyse the colours in both scenarios and work out the best fit profile. So let's create that profile. Now, somebody asked me how I manage the profiles for each of my cameras. So I mentioned I had 6 1DXs because I'm a hoarder like that, and they all have a name. So this is a 1DX Mark II. So I've got 3 1DX Mark IIs and 3 1DX Mark Is. And so the 1DX Mark IIs are called DX2, and then a letter A, B, C, and then the other ones are D, E, F. Yeah. And the profile will come under that name. So I know when I take a shot with a particular camera, because my file names have the same naming on it, I know to apply that profile, and I'll show you that in a minute. So I'll call this DX2A10, because I don't want to confuse it with anything else. I'm just going to do that. Okay. Now, I'll probably need to restart Lightroom, which I'll just do, just in case. We've had enough glitches today. Okay, so if it's all worked, we'll see the profiles in here. So these are my favorites. But then you've got camera matching, which are the ones that match with whatever your camera generates. So the camera ones will produce camera faithful, camera landscape, and so on and so on. We'll switch those off. Profiles are the ones that we've created already. So here's the one that we've just made. I'll go back to my favourites. And we'll close that. So that's already applied it. That's Adobe Color. And that's with the adjustment already made. Okay? So if we just go to one of the images that we shot earlier on, this is straight out of camera, no adjustments, Adobe Color. And when we apply this, you see a shift. Okay? It's a little bit greeny yellow over there, but that's okay. That's probably just because of the temperature shift that's involved in that, because it's calculated two different things. But when I took a shot of Gavin earlier with just a grey card, if I click on that, I'll just click on it bang in the middle. It's giving me 6,450 and 21 there, which I could just apply to this image and it will shift it by a similar amount, 6,450 and 21. So that's a good start point for me. Looks good on my screen, I'm happy with that over there, it's got warmth to it. The point is here that you can create a start point, a believable start point. And then from there, when you're looking at it on a calibrated screen, it will look different, trust me. Even the screen on my laptop's awful, it's not very good. I never use this laptop for calibrating, or colour management, more to the point. You can then shift it to something that you like the look of, because you've got a consistent start point that you can apply across all of your images. Yeah? So if you're shooting in an environment where you can't control the light, every now and then have an assistant or just get one of these things. They normally come with a little lanyard as well. Hang it on a light stand, take a shot of it every now and then, just in different varying light conditions, so that you have a reference point. So that when you're going through images, particularly wedding photographers, and you might have hundreds or thousands of images, not hundreds of thousands of images hopefully, when you cull them down, obviously, you'll pick out those shots. I create a little group in Lightroom called Passport. Okay, so all the shots of the passport just live in that group. So I can go to that any time I want to, depending on where I am in the day, and just use it as a reference and say, this is a good start point, this is how I'm going to make my tweaks. Then I can apply it to a whole set of images. So the Lightroom will recognize the profile created for a particular camera type. So you can see, actually I got this one wrong, it was D2XB and I called it A, but anyway, you get the point. I would pick all the images from that camera's serial number, like this. If you click on that arrow there, and it won't make a difference here because all the cameras are from this one serial number, it'll show you all the images from that particular camera. Then you can just do Control A and then go in and then apply that profile to all those images. You can just sync it up. Yeah? So if you've got two different cameras, so if I did have D2XA here and I have its own profile, I'd select those images from that one camera and apply that profile across that one camera. Then I'll do that to the others and so on and so on. So I'll do it to A, B, C, D, E, and F. So when I start editing, everything's at a good start point, everything's at a good reference point. Is that cool? Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. So what it does is it puts all your images on a level playing field. So even though you'll have images, and I shoot raw with auto white balance throughout the day because it's changing. It's changing. And even if you fix it to one, you're still going to be making adjustments one way or the other on each of the images. So auto white balance will get your camera, get the images on your camera to a decent start point. If you set it to K and have your own temperature, you still have to adjust one way or the other basically. So you still have to do the same amount of work. What this is doing is giving you a neutral start point. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's incredible how much it actually shifts. So we can actually go ahead and process one of these images, why not? Someone was asking me about how I deal with some of the highlights and the shadow areas and that sort of thing here. I have created my own presets just to make my own life a little bit easier. Okay? I'll show you those separately. I'm going to walk through some of my processes anyway when I'm actually developing my raw files. So the first thing I do is try and open up the dynamic range of the image. I don't adjust exposure first. I usually go in and open up some of my shadows first. And then I bring down some of my highlights. Because cameras can't see the same dynamic range that we do. I think the best cameras can see something like 15 stops of dynamic range. I think one DX Mark II sees 11 or something like that, 10 or 11. The human eye sees, I think, 45 or 55 stops of dynamic range. And the example is when you go on holiday and you're walking along the beach and you can see all the tones in the water on the moonlight and you think, oh, that's going to make a wonderful photograph. You get your phone out and take a picture and it looks crap. Right? It's because your phone has like 2 stops of dynamic range. It's just daft. But you can see that and your camera can't. Even though the data's there, when you've taken the picture, you can still open it up. So I'm trying to create more of what I see with my eye. Okay, I know this projector is a little bit green actually because this stuff is grey. Yeah, this is grey, and you have the option of changing all of these things. So you can see it's slightly yellowy green. Doesn't matter what you pick. So that's why this is looking slightly yellowy grey. So it's going to look a little bit tainted. Maybe I'll just compensate for that monitor a little bit actually. Let's make that. Let's cool it down and shift that up. Made a bit of a difference. Let's cool that down a bit more. Okay. So, bring my highlights down, open up the shadows a little bit. And I haven't touched the exposure, and I haven't touched the contrast. Then I'll push my whites up a little bit. It's like brightness, but I won't do it too much. I'm very delicate with this. I tend not to go above 20 with the whites in most cases. And Gavin earlier on showed you that kind of slightly washed out look and feel. There's a number of ways you can do that in Lightroom too. One is by increasing the blacks. It kind of makes it look a little bit more powdery. If you want to make an image look a little punchy, go down a touch. It just depends on the look you're going for. But on an image like this, maybe you want it to be just a little bit soft. Okay? And again, I tend not to go more than plus or minus 8, because I find that this is a very aggressive slider. It can be very heavy. Okay, so we'll just go, let's say plus 7, that's fine. Even with clarity, there was a phase where everyone was just HDRing the hell out of their images. You guys must have seen that. Okay, HDR needs to be handled very, very delicately. Clarity has a very similar effect. So I'm just going to be silly with this. Yeah, it does not look good. It really doesn't look good. I think they give too much control in clarity. Even with the clarity, if I do use it, I tend not to go more than 5. And you think, okay, well, I can barely see the difference there. But when you add up all the little adjustments you make, it's a big effect. And I'll show you the difference between the two. Okay, same thing with dehaze. Dehaze is great when you have a reception filled with haze machines and fog machines and all that kind of stuff. It's literally like trying to shoot through a pea super at times. There's only so much dehaze can do, but it has a very detrimental effect. The thing to remember is all of these adjustments, they're all doing the same thing actually. All they're doing is controlling contrast, but just at different levels. All these things control contrast, just at different levels. So the engine behind dehaze is different to the engine behind clarity, and I'll show you what I mean. That's a lot. Okay, it's not as aggressive, it's not as fake looking, but it's still a lot. And going the other way just doesn't make any sense to me at all. So again, if I add any just for a little bit of definition, I probably wouldn't go more than 5. I tend not to touch these at all. Okay, vibrance and saturation. I tend not to touch these at all. I control my color further down. Okay, but before we get to color, let's look at tone curve. So you'll notice I didn't touch the contrast slider at all. That's because I use the tone curve for my contrast. Okay? So here's the thing to understand with this. You've got highlights, lights, darks and shadows. Now, treat these two together and treat these two together. Okay? So this bit's going to control that part of the histogram, and that there's going to control that part of the histogram. The contrast comes in when you deal with these bits separately and these bits separately. Let me show you what I mean. The contrast slider changes the contrast very hand-fistedly across the entire image. Here you can create contrast just within the highlights and the lights. So I tend to bring the lights down, but then I tend to push the highlights up. Okay, you might think, well, you put the highlights down earlier on. That was a global change. So that's changing the highlights across the entire image. This is now just creating contrast within the top end of the histogram. So, to my eye, that was actually quite pleasing. So I brought this down, it got rid of that peakiness just over here. But this is going to add some of the highlight back. And again, it tends not to be too heavy. It tends to be very, very subtle. Again, I'll open up the shadows a little bit. Well, not quite the shadows, but the dark tones. Just a little bit, not that much. And then I bring the shadows back down. And again, not that much. Right? So this is now giving me contrast in the shadows. I've opened up the dots so I can see what's going on in that range. I'm basically all the way through this process, I'm just trying to create what the human eye sees as much as possible, as much detail as possible. Okay. Now here's a little trick that I've discovered quite painfully over the years, is most light sources are not pure. Most of them have, professional ones tend to be, but most light sources, like the practical lighting in the room, like in here you've got these tube lights, they're meant to give you daylight. But if we switch the lights on again, we won't do it right now, but when the lights come on again, you look at the walls, we know these walls are white, yes? But they look a kind of greeny yellow. So we have to take that out. Now, if you look at the hue, saturation and lightness sliders, you'll see that the reds tend toward the oranges, which then tend toward the yellows, which then tend toward the greens, and so on and so on. So one end of one slider connects with the beginning of the other. Okay? What we want to do is take the yellows away from the greens. We want to purify the yellows a little bit more, so that's the bit that makes images look muddy, in my view. Okay? But we use flash here, so it's not so bad. We didn't use that light source. But here's the effect. It'll take away greens from the yellows. Make sense? It just makes skin tone look healthier, richer. I've gone a little bit too far with this, I wouldn't take it that far. I'd normally go to kind of minus 30 or something like that. So for me, it's always about skin tone. This is creative adjustment, by the way, guys. You know, we've used the X-Rite stuff to actually give ourselves a start point and correct the flaws from the camera sensors. You know, and it's not just the camera sensor, it's also the optics that you're using too. You know, different lenses are going to have different qualities. Some will perform better than others, but at a very microscopic level. But this is me being creative, and this is me saying, I think skin tone should look like this because it's flattering. Okay? So then I tend not to touch much else. If anything else, I might shift these away from green a little bit too. So in very bad situations where we've got LED lighting in a wedding hall or whatever it is, I might take the reds down -1 and the oranges down -3. You think that's not going to make much difference, but let me show you. I'll take that down there, take that down -3. You'll see a shift if I go back in history a little bit. So this is the reds and the yellows. Can you guys see that? Yeah? Undone, redone. It makes a difference. So if you don't believe me, here's a test. If you go down to the luminance sliders, oh by the way, this is really cool as well. So the skin tone is mainly reds, oranges and yellows. Okay? And it's mainly, out of those three, it's mainly oranges and yellows. And you can control how bright someone's skin looks by changing the orange slider. Yeah? If you think you've kind of underdone it slightly, just bring the orange luminance up a little bit more. Same thing in the reds. Okay? You see that in the middle there, in the reds? That's because of our blood. And then the yellows tend to be other stuff, usually other light sources, or just the sort of diffracted light through your light source. The lens on the front of your light source is going to split the spectrum. You get a bit of all of that too. Okay. So if the image was quite cold, I'd probably warm up the shadows a little bit too, but this is already quite warm, I'm not going to do that so much, but I can show you the effect of it. I tend to quite like 40 degrees and a saturation of about 10. Okay, so if I undo that and redo it, it warms up the shadows, and again the whole thing starts to look more flattering. Everything I'm doing is to flatter the subject. Imagine this was one of your brides. The brides are always fussy, they're always going to nitpick their own pictures. Even if it's a beautiful picture that's 110 and want to go, no, I don't like the way I look in that picture. So you've got to do everything you can to try and flatter them. Moving down. Sharpening. Okay, I have a preset for that. But I have a preset for all of this. I have one preset that does most of this in one hit. But I want to just talk you through the process, the thinking. So I call it edge sharpening, and it does that to the sliders. So the amount looks very high, but I've got masking up. So does everyone know what this does? Is there anyone who doesn't know what this does? Masking. No, everyone's got it? Okay, cool. No? Someone put their hand up? You don't know what it does? So what masking does is, if we zoom into the picture, okay, if I put the sharpening all the way to the top, detail all the way to the top, come on. Doesn't want to do it. There we go. Sharpening looks for the edges. Sorry, masking looks for the edges. That's with masking off. It sharpened every single pixel. Every single pixel. But you don't need to sharpen the skin this much. I just want the detail around here, and I want the detail around the eyebrows, and the eyelashes, and all that sort of thing. So, if I put the masking up, it'll look for the edges, basically. So if you don't believe me, I'll take the sharpening back down, and you'll see the softness come back in around here again. Yeah? So this is why I call it edge sharpening. Then I have a couple of different noise reduction settings depending on what ISO I'm on, because I'm very OCD like that. But the ISO wasn't particularly high here. You know, I might just do that one there for the sake of it. I could use the profile corrections, so Adobe have gone and analysed every single lens, well not every single, but most lenses from most manufacturers, and worked out where the vignetting is and distortion and all that kind of stuff. I actually think this takes a little something away from the image. In this case it's okay because it's quite a low-key image, but I don't mind the vignetting. I'm going to bring it back in again. Transformation, don't need to touch that, so we won't even look at that. And this is where you can affect some other change as well. So essentially, this camera calibration panel here should become defunct if you've used this and you've created your profiles. So this was a manual way of adjusting what your colors are doing, what your primary colors are doing when you don't have this. If you know your camera's behaving in a particular way, you know you have a shot of a neutral panel or wall or something or other, and it doesn't look, just like on the screen, this grey looks slightly greeny to me. You know, I would adjust some of those greens out. So generally what I would do is change the green hue, and it makes it more magenta. Did you see that? Yeah? So that's coping with any greeniness that you might get. Quite often you'll get it from the excessive greeny hues from a lot of artificial light sources, particularly the energy-saving ones. They're hideous. But we'll undo that one for now. This is one I quite like, to make skin tone look healthier and more alive. Okay, it's a blue saturation there. It looks overdone over here. So just for this projector, I'm going to bring this down even more. 4600, we'll put it down. Right, so let's go back to that blue primary. No adjustment? A bit of adjustment. Skin looks really healthy, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, so if I go back to the raw, that's out of camera, that's what I've done. Big shift, isn't it? Who thought that looked good in the first place? I thought it was okay. It's amazing what you do when you apply the profile adjustments and then the subtle adjustments along the way. Is that cool? Okay, so slightly differently now, I'm going to switch to a different catalogue. And I will show you some stuff that I did for the last round of competitions earlier this year, and how much of a difference all these things make. Right, that's a shot. Let's get rid of this out. It's a shot I did. Were any of you on the webinar that was on earlier this week? Anyone on that? There it was. Okay. I spoke about this in it, and it's Can I do that? You guys hear me? Yeah. So this is the wedding we shot last year, and I attended the print competitions earlier this year. And shot at dead of night was literally the closing shot. And when I say dead of night, I knew it was at midnight when we went up. We'd started at probably 7 o'clock in the morning with these nights. But I love shooting at night. I love being able to layer in light. There's more control at night, I think, to be able to layer light and create the mood that you want. Anyway, they had this lovely hotel, but they had these floodlights, which are just kind of just off the scene over here and over here, which are uplighting the building. And there was some sort of artificial sodium thing, and it was giving off this horrible green hue all the way through. So of course I had to take that out. I'm a bit of a green phobe, the lights were quite white. And I lit the couple from inside the doorway with an LED Fresnel light. Okay. So, I mean actually these rotor lights were done brilliantly now as well, because they're lovely softness, and they're probably a much larger, they're a much larger light source than I was using, so you get that softness coming in too. And with the barn doors, so I had to use barn doors on this, but we've got barn doors on these ones over here. And that's going to control the light not spilling onto that back wall and onto that door so much. Okay, because I had different light sources. And even though I gelled my lights, so I'd put probably half or maybe probably a quarter CTO on that interior one on there, just to warm it up a little bit. I didn't want to gel it too much because then I'd end up with weird casts and colour qualities that I had to deal with in the post-production often, so I keep it as pure as possible. Anyway, that was the base shot. That's what I got out of camera. That's the most I could do in that scenario. And this is just with lighting adjustment. That's not Photoshop, that's just lighting adjustment. And if you don't believe me, if you think I do anything different to this than what I just showed you, have a look at the settings. Right? Open up the shadows, put the highlights down, blacks down a bit, the whites up a bit, clarity a little bit, dehaze a little bit. Tone curve looks familiar. See what I did with the yellows and the oranges there? That's where a lot of that change is happening. Did you see that? That desaturates some of that yellow, because it was very strong. Yeah, it was very strong. I'm making it a little brighter. Let's bring that up a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of yellow in this image actually. Warmed up my shadows. Warmed up my highlights a tiny bit there. Sharpening, the same. Noise reduction applied. Oh, this was shot at 4,000 ISO. Okay, so it should have been a really noisy image. And you look at that, then profiles applied. And some of the adjustments there that I was talking about. Okay. They're not massively heavy adjustments, are they? But they have a massive effect between the two. There was some transformation going on, they just scraped up the image a little bit. So, we'll take the front on. And that's just a dynamic color. So that's the profile for that particular camera. So switch that on so you can see the difference. You see that shift? Yeah. So it's opening up colours, it's purifying them. It's showing you what the camera should be seeing for each of those colours. So again, out the camera. So I've done what I can to shape my light. So I've had a couple of lights just behind that column over here. And a very similar setup to this actually. So a gridded, more focused light on white, and then a much larger square to fill in the rest of the shadows across to height. Okay. And that's process. Settings are pretty much the same. Yeah, you'll make some creative tweaks here and there just to give you a little feel that you want. Other than that, as I said, and then we'll apply. I wouldn't apply this at the end, by the way. I apply this right at the start. Okay. So let's just go back to the catalog I had before. Let me just show you some image that version. And eventually. Okay. So if I just create a virtual copy and reset that. This will be my workflow. Okay? I've got a bunch of different presets here that do more or less the same thing but with minor adjustments depending on the scenario. So this is an indoor passport. Okay, so download that, install it into Lightroom. Keep your objects going, give the profile a name. So you could have just done that. I could have just done that straight from here. I could have picked that lovely picture of Dad, clicked on that, typed in the profile name, clicked on export, and it would have done it, and it would have been in Lightroom now. But I wanted to walk you through the process. I wanted to show you how the dual illuminant thing works. But you've got to be quite picky with where you take a picture of a passport in both scenarios. So what I did in here was I took a picture under these practical lights and then had another one with a flash. What I would do normally is take a picture outside in daylight, not on a sunny day, overcast. And then I would do one indoors in my typical environment that I'm shooting in, which is usually, sort of fluorescent LED, whatever is being used nowadays, the energy efficient bulbs, because they give off that kind of green, yellow green. So I use those two pictures to create my profiles. Does that make sense? You get that question? Absolutely. Well, for that camera. For that camera. Yeah, absolutely. So when I go around doing the profile shot, I'll have all my assistants with the whole row of cameras, and I'll have the passport outside, like everyone take a picture of that, and then indoors sending everyone take a picture of this, and then afterwards we go back and create that profile. So I tend not to create a profile for each event. It's accurate enough that I can just use that same profile kind of forever. So whenever I change the camera, I get a new body and I have to do that. So day before yesterday, I was doing a portrait session, a family portrait session. Canon gave me a 5DSR, so I had to do a profile for that. But it's in the environment I'm shooting, and I don't need dual illuminant for that, because I was working with flash the whole time.
So if you're doing the same camera, but you're smaller, that's a really good vision.
For when something, no, because the outdoor shot would have taken for one half of that dual illuminant, would have given me a neutral start. Yeah, exactly. Because what it's doing is it's compensating for the camera's behavior in how it's interpreting those colors. And it's going to interpret these colors the same amount, whether it's sunny or daylight, slightly overcast or a little bit brighter than overcast. The variance is still the same. You're just giving it another sample to measure off. Basically. Does that make sense?
So you don't profile everyone in here?
No. No. I'll profile my cameras once.
This is what I was thinking, I can just not get one of those. Profile every scenario.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You could do if you're really, really risky. But trying to manage that would be a nightmare afterwards. Because what it does is it puts all the profiles in one place. You have a big list of profiles otherwise.
Yeah, which is what I'm saying then.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't need to manage all those profiles.
No.
But actually, you don't need to do that.
One profile for each camera and name the profile the same as the file name on the camera. So I did that once.
So would you do it again if it's different churches or it's just
Because the amount, the variance in your camera, so say it's reading that red,
yeah.
that camera is going to read that slightly differently, but it's going to read that red differently no matter what the light source you're on.
Yeah.
Okay? But just giving it a different color temperature sample is going to make the profile more accurate. That's why I do the dual one. So one indoors in my general environment I'm usually in, and one outdoors in another class day.
That makes sense. I was thinking this thing's going to
Oh, this is brilliant. This has changed my workflow. So, I mean, to the point where the colours that come out of my print are rich and vibrant and believable. Skin tones is my priority, guys. You know, I shoot people, apart from I shoot cars, unless I shoot people in cars. But anyway, skin tone has to be spot on. Can you imagine that? Everyone's seen photographs of themselves, right? And everyone hates them very much. I hate my photographs, but you start looking for flaws. And the biggest thing is, if your skin tone is completely wrong, that's going to be parked in your client's head from the get-go. And they're just going to start finding errors. They're going to be fault finding the whole way through. You need to try and eliminate as many of these flaws and faults from the beginning as much as possible. You want the confidence in your writing tools. So when I do my viewings, I do them on the TV. When I profile my TV as much as possible, it's got limitations how much you can do. I used to take them into my editing suite and let them look at all the images in Lightroom. I used to change the name up here at the top and put my name up there and pose all the panels and look at it, put it in the full screen view or wherever it was. And then see all the images in Lightroom on a color management screen. But Lightroom was just heavy and slow and it was just cumbersome when you were trying to change images. So I had to make sure that what I was doing was absolutely correct. Exported them all as JPEGs, resizing for the resolution of my TV, color calibrating my TV as much as possible using my own perspective. And I've had these nights.
So you export all this as Adobe RGB and send your print?
Not as Adobe RGB. So for printing, I have my color profiles consistent all the way through. So Canons, I don't know about the others, but Canons will allow you to shoot in sRGB or Adobe RGB. I shoot sRGB. It's fine. It's good enough.
Some of these printers that I use, we use essentially for albums.
Graphic.
Yeah. So
It's that they can print in Adobe. You don't have to.
So you don't want to use.
Yeah, because when I print my own stuff in my showroom, I've got a big Canon Pixel Pro 1. Basically capturing an sRGB. My monitor's calibrated to sRGB. I've got my camera profiles going on. When I'm editing in Lightroom, in Photoshop, sorry, I'm in sRGB, you can see it right there. And do everything I need to do there. One of the big things that a lot of people miss out is paper profiling. So if you're printing to a particular kind of paper, make sure you download and install that paper profile into Photoshop. So when you output from there, it knows how the printer paper needs to behave. So basically, when my prints come out, they look exactly as they do on my screen. Give or take a couple of percentage. The screens are backlit, the paper's not backlit. Yeah. So, is that cool? Any more questions?
So if I understand correctly, you're not actually using it to change the correct forecast and also some lighting situation.
It won't allow you to do that. Color cast is color cast. You have to try and engineer out color casts in the HSL panel. That panel becomes very powerful.
Right, and that's purely artistic for you.
Yeah. See, I have to deal with scenarios, wedding receptions, where there's heavy blue lighting, heavy magenta lighting, heavy green lighting, just crazy stuff going on. And sometimes where there's no white light, you can't correct that. You can't correct for no white light. You know, that's when either flashes come out and it becomes a black and white picture. You know? If there's no white light, how do you make white light in a picture? You can't do it. It will just look muddy and murky and disgusting. So unless it looks cool as a coloured shot, like it might be people on the dance floor going crazy and you've got blue from here and magenta from here and something else from somewhere else, it could look quite cool and you just work with that colour. But if it's, say, the reaction of a guest during speeches and they've just got purple lights on them, they're never going to want that picture in a million years. They'll love it as black and white. Yeah? Because if it's a reaction where they're laughing or crying, black and white will just draw you toward that expression, toward the energy in that picture. Then it's not about colour at all. Does that make sense?